challenges, right? Because there's a tension between what would be the perfect amount you could raise and how much do I think I could raise. So I think you start with actually, ideally, how much would I raise, right, today, to go, actually, where do I think I need to be in 2 years' time, for example, or 18 months' time to hit the proof points that I would need for another raise, right? And maybe you think you can do a lot better than that, like 5 times better than that, and that's great. But whatever you think that maximum achievable thing is, the fastest you could go, that you could reasonably go without risking everything falling apart, how much would I need to get there?
You're thinking of building a company or already run a company that is not registered, but you want to get registered. I've looked at a lot of solutions, and one of the best ones in the market right now is Doula. I reached out to Arjun, who is actually the founder of Doula.com. I asked him if he'd like to work together on the podcast. He was like, of course. Doula is sort of a platform that helps founders and businesses form and manage US companies, regardless of where they live. If someone is living in India, for example, and wants to start a company and get it registered in the US, he or she can do it by using Doula.com. Doula helps in forming the company. It can be an LLC, C Corp, or you name it. Doula offers a US address and a bank account to users, which can allow you to conduct business transactions that you can receive and send payments no matter where you live in the world from the United States. And other than that, they also provide tax consultation to the users, which is an incredible feature. And Doula simplifies the process of establishing and managing a US company, and especially for founders that are not in the US. And regardless of where they live, you can get your company registered with Doula.com. To check out Doula, go to doula.com/exerton. That is DOOLA.com/EXERTON.
Hey Mark, how are you? Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, having a good day. Thanks, Avik.
Before we get into the other stuff that full Mark, wait.
That's a good question. I'll start early. I was a maths undergraduate at Cambridge University. I went into the financial markets in London. I was an interest rate swap trader at banks for 7 years. In 2001, I quit to go do a master's in AI. Wasn't an awful lot around then, but I found a really good course at Sussex University in Brighton that turned out to be run by one of Geoffrey Hinton's mentors, Geoffrey Hinton, who later won the Turing Prize and went to work at Google. I did not know that at the time, but it was a great course. I met my wife, who was doing her undergrad at the time, so good for a whole host of reasons. Then went back into financial markets, joined a small proprietary trading group, built the systematic trading side of that up from scratch to become most of that business. Was doing a side project in poker and AI with a friend where we actually sort of co-built the world's best poker AI of the time. This all predates DeepMind, was done on like a £2,000 home PC. So you can imagine the amount of processing power and an amount of data, that limited amount of data you can put through. But that was a fun project at a time when basically there was no commercial research into AI. It was all basically out of academia. Eventually brought my friend into the trading business, and we built the fully AI version of that trading system. And I was doing that up until about 6 years ago. The last 8 years of that, I lived and worked from Lugano in the Italian part of Switzerland. Then moved here to Guernsey with my wife and 4 sons. So that's really what keeps me busy outside of work. Started doing some angel investing, got brought on as advisor and then partner at a small VC out here. And then about 20 months ago, left because I thought I could do it better. Now have a portfolio of 15 different startups, which, while performance is nascent, is still actually pretty good. So yeah, that's me, and that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, it was like 20 years ago. I think a lot of people were thinking about it, but how did you guys got the whole AI narrative?
I mean, I think it was literally as simple as like the sort of November or December beforehand. I'd been on holiday with a load of like South African surfer friends, and one of them had a book on AI, and he'd lent it to me, and I went, That's really interesting." Went did some research, and decided I wanted to go and investigate it further. And it was one of those sort of now or never moments. I had a good job. It was going well. I'd had a nice bonus, which had just sort of paid off my mortgage, so I didn't have any commitments. I wasn't in a long-term relationship, and it really felt like one of those sort of sliding door moments. And if I either do it now, or I probably carry on down the path that I was on forever. And so you don't know, right? That turns out so far to have been a good choice and decision for me, but you never know what your life would be if you've gone down that other path.
Did you consider raising money for it rather than?
There's no sort of kind of legal way to put the poker stuff to work. You're not allowed to put sort of AI bots on poker sites. So we did have a like training site where to help people like train themselves to be better poker players. But I think we weren't at the time very good at turning that into a business. I didn't really know that sort of venture capital type things even existed. And knowing how I was 20 years ago, I wasn't investable. I was a technologist that thought if you just built like incredible technology, like your business would just automatically work without realizing there's an awful lot more to it than that. So I'm pretty sure the me now would not invest in the me of 20 years ago, not even close. So
Why were you not invested?
I think, and you and I sort of touched on this sort of just before we started the podcast, that I'm 50, right? But I still learn an awful lot every year. And I think the bits there's a whole load of bits that I was missing, to be honest. Personality, emotional balance, like sales, like a whole load of stuff where if you'd gone, people would have like generally got on with me and go, Mark's smart, but they wouldn't have gone, I can see that Mark can like run or build a business or necessarily be an entrepreneur. I don't think they would have seen that, which I think is a function of like, I am learning a lot every year still, and that's compounding. And if you imagine that sort of reflected back into the past, the sort of decompounding, if you like, I could be a long way behind 20 years ago, right? That's compounding is a big thing.
How do you think does that improvement take place from not being investable to becoming?
So I think it started with, I think, a desire for self-improvement, right? Without necessarily being aware of what the flaws were. It did start with that, and that took me on a path where I was happy to be sort of open-minded and explore all the ways that could happen. And over time, that has brought me to where I am today. But I think it started with that mindset of being open to the fact that you can improve and that you are imperfect, combined with a strong desire to do so.
A lot of guests that I've had on previously, most of them have told me that what investors look for is that in the founder is that he or she should be formidable. Being formidable and knowing that you're not good enough, how do these two things go?
That's a really good question. So I think actually it is about that. You can't improve unless you're open-minded to improve. Because those people that were formidable were not necessarily formidable all the time. Or you can get there, right? Some people will start off at a higher level and some people will grow faster to get there. But actually, I'm pretty sure every single one of those people is not assuming that they know everything. and is open-minded to learning, and that is one of the aspects that gets them there. It's like the kid in the classroom, the one who asks the questions, and the one who says, I don't understand. Actually, if the one who's happy to stick their hand up and say, I don't understand, learns way more than the one that just sits there quietly. And it is that same mindset that, for me, that whatever you're trying to achieve in your life, right, whether it's to be the founder of a business or, personal improvement in any area, really, right? It is that desire to go, I don't actually know everything yet, and I'm happy to realize I don't know everything yet, and to try and figure that out. And that doesn't have to be about business success. It could be about personal happiness. It could be something spiritual, right? There's a whole load of different things, but I think it's sort of the difference between, and this definitely translates back into a founder skill, of waiting for things to happen to you, or trying to do the things that make them happen.
I mean, if I just go back to the last point about the kid in the class now, what do you think is the one kid, if you imagine, like, in a hypothetical universe, what do you think is one hesitant towards raising his or her hand, where the other is comfortable?
I think it's what do you think the cause is of it?
Yeah, I mean, metaphorically, of course. I'm not asking the psychology of kids, but if you translate to that.
And it's a good question, because I've got young kids, and I'm like, you sit there and you go, I want you to do this and do this and do this. And you're like, actually, am I teaching them the right things? Should I be teaching them the things, or should I be teaching them to have the right mindset to get to the things? And probably we spend our whole time teaching them about the things rather than teaching them to have the right mindset. But I think it's like a fear of looking stupid, actually, to go when someone goes, doesn't want to say, I don't know. And also, I think there are social pressures, right, where kids don't want to be seen as like the teacher's pet or anything like that. So I think it's a combination of two things: fear of like not looking like, you don't want people to know that you don't understand, or maybe you don't want the teacher to know that you don't understand, so you just sit there. And again, it's that make things happen or wait for them to happen to you.
If you use the same terminology for founders, most investors, what they want is a founder who is clear in our ideas and knows what to do. But if you want them to say that I don't know when they don't know, is that really good?
So, I mean, that's a good question. So you obviously want them to be as skilled in all the areas they need to be skilled as possible. But startups are scrappy things. Like, as a founder, you're going to have to do like 10 or 20 things that you've never done before, and just figure out how the hell you're going to do that, right? And so I think that's where it translates back. And I'm also pretty sure every exited founder that IPO'd for their unicorn or decacorn or whatever it was would say, I know a lot more than I knew 10 years ago, right? There's no doubt they would say that they knew that. And they had to go on that path and on that learning journey, and they had to operate through that like huge amounts of uncertainty. So but you never really, even if you've got the skills, you never 100% know that every decision you make is the right one. You're still like always trying to figure it out.
Out of founders really figure things out. I mean, because it's hard. Everyone knows it's hard building something from scratch and taking it wherever they want to take it. But how does the figuring out thing really take?
So I think there's two parts to it. One is you can just sit there and try and like have the right brain and the right approach and figure it out and do some research. And then I would and so one of the questions that I ask founders is like, how is what you're doing today different from what you thought it would be on day one, right? And so I'm trying to get an insight into that mindset, into what's going on in their head in terms of how did they figure it out, right? Did they just kind of, even if they're doing well, did they luck into it? Or did actually they have a really smart, thoughtful way of figuring out what the right things were that their customers really wanted that solved the problems that their clients have. So I think it's a hard question to know exactly what the right answer to that, but it is kind of decision making skills, and sometimes it's as simple as like, actually, if you know a community of founders, someone might have had exactly the same problem, ask them, and maybe what they did doesn't translate, but like a whole load of times some of those problems are actually solved problems, and don't try and recreate the wheel. So I think that's actually quite important to have a network of people that you're not afraid to call upon when you don't know the answer.
If you touched a little bit upon luck there. How do you differentiate between someone who has figured it out versus someone who hasn't?
So that's a really good question, and it's a question that applies across like such a broad range of life, I would say, right?
Yeah.
Even for an investor, right? Every time one of my deals goes right, you shouldn't assume that everything I did was right. There's always a certain element of luck, and whenever one of my deals goes wrong, it's not that everything about that deal was wrong or everything about that deal was right. And so how do you figure it out? I think what you're trying to hear is some of the decisions they made and how they got to the point of making that decision. And then I guess pattern matching with what you personally believe is a good way to make decisions. Or if it's something new, you go, okay, that's really interesting and a really smart, clever way to go and solve that problem. But really it requires examples of their thought process, and then you applying your own sort of prejudices and biases to whether you think that makes sense.
Venture capital is really sort of a pattern matching game, but one problem which I think comes with pattern matching, basically venture capital, so like when you try to match the patterns by looking in the past, and you have your Airbnb, Google right there, which are sort of like a narrative violation, you miss out on those deals. So how do you deal with that?
So I don't think you have to miss out on those deals as a result of them. And obviously there were smart people that did that. But effectively, that's how everyone learns. We all learn by pattern matching. The question is, what do you learn? Do you learn that X does well? Or do you have some underlying principles where you go, okay, this is what generates good and less good? I think if you just go, X did well last time, therefore anything that looks similar to X will do well next time, rather than you go, hey, Airbnb, and look, I don't know that much about Airbnb directly, but great founders had an idea. Actually, it changed quite a bit. Airbnb was like literally, it was like, we're going to put you up on an airbed. That's where the air came from originally, right? So what they ended up doing with an incredible business was a little different, but you're going, okay, what can I take? What's the right thing to take from there, right? And there's a whole load of things you could take from there. It's like, oh, I should just do things where no one's ever done this before. Or that's probably not on its own enough. But for example, the lesson there could be actually, light back on. The lesson could be they created a market that didn't exist before, right? And then you go, well, how could I have had because most people passed on Airbnb, right? The consensus was no. So you go back and go, well, what were the conditions that led to the chance for them to become what they were going to become, right? And then you've got to figure out what those lessons are, right? And can I then apply those to are they ones that I would be comfortable applying to an entirely different business in an entirely different market, right? What are the times when I believe a new huge market could be created? And you've got to create a hypothesis, or maybe even sort of multiple hypotheses in your head, and then see how they play out over time in other businesses. So when you see another person do that, go, would that have enabled me to spot this? Does it have those conditions? Does it not have those conditions? Obviously, there's like 20 other things. Some of which there was an incredible founder. There was that wasn't what they were doing on day one. And I might have gone, well, no one's going to stay on an airbed. And I'd have been probably right, because that was not what they ended up doing. So then a thing could be, well, I should just need to completely ignore whatever business they're doing on day one, because I've just got great founders. And that's enough. And I think they came through Y Combinator, and that is a little bit of their attitude, actually, because they take people so early, where they go, actually, if you need to pivot, we're going to help you get to the mindset to go do that. But there's like 20 lessons that you could take from that, probably more, and you have to figure out for yourself what you think those right lessons are, have a hypothesis in your head, and then whenever you see something new, you kind of go, what you're doing is trying to create a mental model of the world and how that might evolve, and then constantly refine that based on examples. And it's hard, right? It's hard. And I'm not saying I know all the right lessons to take from that or not. And I don't do it as formally as, hey, what are all these hypotheses? But when I see something that challenges what I previously thought, I am going to make subtle updates to my mental model so that I can make better decisions in future.
How is it different from the founder being invested in versus the company being
invested? So at the earliest stages, it's always an aggregate of both, right? And the earlier you are, the more important the founder is. Actually, I think they're important all the way through. But what happens is you get the later you go, the more proof points you have on the founder via the metrics of the business, right? So you can actually imply a chunk of the things about founder strength from how the company is doing. On day one, there are barely any metrics. There might be some, particularly if you're doing pre-seed. Seed, you start to have some metrics. And so you kind of can't really differentiate those two things, because you want a business with a great opportunity to get there. The reason the founder matters is they won't get there without a great founder, right? So fundamentally, you only really care about the chance the business will hit and how big that could be. But the chance of that actually happening, or in the case of an Airbnb, them pivoting into a sort of an adjacent space, which ended up being the one where they got product market fit, that is driven by the quality of the founder. So you kind of can't differentiate the two things at all. They are intimately tied up.
But how do you, you usually, before investing, you might talk to a founder for like 6 months, 5 months, a month, 2 months, something like that. How do you figure all this out by talking to them?
So in terms of the people, actually, I think you can, but you just need to have met enough, right? Once you've met hundreds of founders, like anything, you start to get a feel for who's good and who is less good. And who are that top 1% founder that you go, actually, I kind of want to give my money. Yes, I'm going to have a look at the business, but this is the sort of person that I want to back. And I think it's difficult to do without just having met a lot of them. And once you have, you actually get good, or I believe I've got good, at telling pretty fast who a good founder is. So that's super helpful, because over time you build up, this is precisely what I'm looking for. And again, to a certain extent, you're pattern matching, right? And you're going to get it wrong sometimes, right? Whatever my pattern is not going to be perfect, but it's the best I've got so far. And I will be constantly making subtle updates to what that thing is. But I now can get to a point where I can meet a founder and very quickly know whether or not this is someone that I would be comfortable giving money to, I'm then still going to dig into that business and figure out, okay, do I have both sides of the story? And if you do, then you've got something incredible.
How would you figure that out? I mean, of course, it's tough it's tough to share your whole pattern with us, your 50 years of learning. But if you boil that down to what you are in the moment when you're talking to the founder, what would that be?
So I think there's a few things that you are looking for. I think like actually the ability to sell is an insanely important skill that not everyone, but some people don't rate highly enough, because you're going to need to raise money again, right? So you have to be able to sell to people like me. You have to be able to sell the product. And actually, you want to be able to hire the best possible people to come into your company. And I know some founders that when they've been trying to hire someone, that person has had 5 different opportunities. Theirs is the one that on the face of it looks least attractive, but that person after meeting them has gone, I want to go work for them. So that ability, again, which is tied into communications and sales skill, is where someone goes, hey, I want to work for you. Like your business is, yes, you've got a business idea and a purpose that you're working towards, but it's also that sum of the people that you've got. And if you can hire people, they want to come and work for you, that's an incredible skill. So there's like a whole load of other things as well. But if I had to pick one thing, that's the one thing.
How do you think does that selling skill evolve over time? If you talk to someone at pre-seed, they're not honed enough sort of to sell that. But as you get to later stages, I think the founder gets so much experience that they get so good at selling things. So how do you think does that evolution take?
So I think firstly what I'm looking for is actually the personality that can do it, even if they don't 100% have the skill, right? And I think it is that, because obviously the sales process and being able to manage a sales process, and if it's enterprise sales, those kinds of things, they might not have those skills, those specific skills on day one, but you can tell they are good at explaining things clearly and in a compelling way where you go, oh my God, that sounds incredible. You can feel the personality type that has the potential to do that. Even if they don't have those specific skills because they've never actually sold before. And so I think you, like any skill, you can develop over time, but it's harder. You kind of need to have something on day one. And you're right, those people are not going to be 100% the polished article on day one unless they're, they've had 2-3 exits beforehand. Look, but then everyone's trying to get into those deals, right?
How do you think our sort of thing the polished law school is one better at selling things compared to pre-seed work? I mean, we're barely sold anything.
Oh, as in VCs aren't good at selling, you think? So I think that's interesting because the bit that people don't realize that's always going on with VCs is they are, as well as founders constantly raising for their business, VCs are on a cycle where they're also constantly raising for their funds. And not every partner is involved in sales, but some of them are. And those people have to be good at sales. And it's a very different type scale in terms of who they're looking for and how they sell what they do, but they actually do have to be good at it, or they won't have a business either.
Are you good at selling?
I'm learning.
Yeah. I think good. If we pivot on sort of on the same line, the selling side of things, how do you know if a person is, when they're selling something, they're actually being honest about it, whereas just flunking it? That.
So that's also an excellent question, because you want the kind of best salespeople and storytellers almost, right? You want those best people, and those people the best ones are almost mesmerizing, right? Where they almost cast a spell on you. So perfect looks like you need to be able to tell that they're one of those people, but also to see through it to what the fundamentals of what they're saying underneath, where you go, oh my God, that person sold that to me incredibly well, told such a good story. And actually the facts that underlie it also make sense. And obviously the better they are at sales, almost the harder it is to figure out whether those bits underneath are true. So there is a bit of a tension there, but that's what, if I'm doing what I do as well as I possibly can, I want to be able to sense that sales skill and still see through it and go, and actually everything they said, even without that bit, makes a lot of sense. So it is a challenge because of those things, but that's what perfect looks like.
But if they're good at selling, then why would you still run it in your brain? Is what you're looking for is a person who is great at selling, and they're so good at selling that they almost lessonize you to thinking that they're great at selling, and you're boiling it down to the trustworthy side of things. Yeah, I think I get it.
Yeah, I think it's not the only skill that you're looking for, right? There are other skills that you're looking for as well, and you do want there to be a great business or great potential business that sits behind it as well. So that piece has to exist. And even while they're good at selling to you, you have to have that ability to see through it, to figure out if that's true, right? So yeah, you have to have all the pieces.
How do you see through it?
Again, that's hard, and I think it's just experience talking to enough people, probably having met enough people with that skill in your life. Because I think the first time you meet someone who is such a good storyteller and is so mesmerizing, you will just get swallowed up by it, right? And you won't even realize that that's what's going on. Again, once you've met like hundreds or thousands of founders, you will have met enough of those people and go, hey, that's definitely a skill that I want, but it's not enough on its own. And you'll start to develop that ability to hear the words as well as the way that they tell them.
On the same line, how do you think should founders figure out how much they want to raise?
That's a good question. And I think that there's challenges, right? Because there's a tension between what would be the perfect amount you could raise and how much do I think I could raise. So I think you start with, actually, ideally, how much would I raise, right, today, to go, actually, where do I think I need to be in 2 years' time, for example, or 18 months' time, to hit the proof points that I would need for another raise, right? And maybe you think you can do a lot better than that, like 5 times better than that, and that's great. But whatever you think that maximum achievable thing is, the fastest you could go, that you could reasonably go without risking everything falling apart, how much would I need to get there? That's one thing. Then you've got to try and figure out how much the market would take, right? So ideally, you're in a situation where you go, that is the number that I want, and I'm pretty sure I can go raise that. It's not always the case. It might be the market will only take raising half of that or a third of that. And then you go, okay, do I have credible plans? Can I make a credible plan still to hit what those minimum necessary metrics are to get to the next stage? So if you're a seed, you kind of know what the metrics you need to get to for Series A are, and you need to give yourself enough of a chance to get there each time. So that's a kind of lower bound. If you can't raise enough to get to that next point, that's going to be a big problem. And then there's well, actually, could I do a lot better than that if I raise more money, right? Can I go faster without everything unraveling, and how would I do that? And then maybe you can make that case. So the number's going to be that you want to raise is going to be somewhere between those two things.
How do you know how much you want to raise for the next 2 years?
The short answer is you don't. You never know. You're operating under uncertainty. But the long answer is like you should know your business as well as you possibly can and go, what is the fastest I could possibly, if I had an infinite amount of money in the bank, right? What pace would I grow this company at, right? How fast could I grow it at? Because obviously there's a limit to how much money you can reasonably put to work. For most businesses on day one, if someone gives you $100 million, actually you probably shouldn't be using it, right? Because you're just going to try and do everything. You're probably going to not talk to your customers before you try and start building like the perfect product with all the bells and whistles. So you go, what does perfect look like in terms of if I could go as fast as I possibly could, how much money would I have, right? And so that gives you an upper bound, the maximum amount that you should raise. The lower bound then is, I know, let's say you're a pre-seed, I know what people expect to see at seed in order that I can raise another round. What's the minimum that would get me there? And then you have to raise the minimum and you try and raise closer to the maximum, right? And then you've got to kind of figure out how much you're going to go and ask for because you don't know how much the market could. It depends on the market. So you're then going to like try and take feedback from the market, from people in your network, maybe from friendly VCs about what they could plausibly raise, whether or not they're going to invest in them or not. And then you kind of just got to figure it out. I know that's not actually that helpful, those words. But because you're operating under uncertainty, right? The challenge is always if you ask for too much, people will go, well, that's just not credible. And therefore, you kind of think. The other thing is if you ask for a lot and then you raise more than what that minimum amount is, those investors might go, oh, you said you were going to raise that much. And so I was investing on the basis of that, right? So it's a challenge and there's lots of different things that sort of play off against each other.
But if you decide, I mean, how do you, is it better to raise less money than the perfect amount or more money than the perfect amount?
So that's a really good question. And I heard sort of, it was on a 20 VC, it was, and I can't remember who he had on, but Harry said that he wanted them to raise more so that if it didn't work out straight away, they had room for a pivot or room to go, I've got a bit more. The other VC was like, actually, I want them to raise the lower amount because they have that sort of gun to the head mentality where they just have to make it work, right? And when you have to make it work, often you are more likely to make it work because you know you can't ease up, right? At the moment you ease up, no matter how much money you've got in the bank, it isn't going to happen. You have to be working at maximum intensity. So I don't quite know where I sit between those two things. I think in general, I would rather have more, try and go faster, but be paying close attention. And if it's not working, if it's not working when you're trying to go faster, you can always pull back the pace a little and use that to give you a bit more time to figure it out.
Yeah, but you're going to feel like you have to make it work. Why do you have to make it work in terms of the money side of things? Because a lot of founders that I've talked to, I mean, not on podcasts, but sort of like in the early stages, one of them I was talking to them like, I mean, it was like an extremely weird thing, but I was like, all right. It's like, I care about making the company work. The money is not mine. The money is not the VC's. Then I don't care a lot about the money. How could you comment?
So I think there were two questions there, right? One was about the sort of gun to the head mentality, and to a certain extent, I think those questions were a bit a function of the 2020-21 market, right? Where people were being given more money, they could raise more money than they needed, right? And that was quite common. And so that whole should I raise this much if I can question has it's not gone away, but it's certainly a lot less common than it was. The other one, in terms of the motivation, I think different people have different motivations. Some are mission driven. Some go, I just want to make this work. Maybe they feel they've got something to prove, or they've got great self motivation. Some people do want to make money, and I don't think that's a terrible motivation either, as long as you still think that even when times get tough, they're gonna stick it out and figure it out. So I think you've just described one of the motivations where someone is gonna go, I'm just gonna try and I'm gonna figure this out no matter what. I don't really care about that bit. And as an investor, actually that's fine, because you just want to know that they've got that mentality where they are just gonna, whatever the motivation, whatever the reason for it, they're gonna find a way to make it work.
You talk about one of the challenges that people face is running out of money. You think companies should keep reserves?
So sometimes you don't have the luxury, right? Where you go, I've got this much money and I know I have to, as a minimum, hit these metrics, and there's not that much room for maneuver, and I'm either going to make it or I'm not going to make it. In terms of reserves, I think ideally you would go, I may need to get there in 18 months, but I've got enough money to get there in 2 years, let's say. And you've also got well, I plan to hire at this pace and increase my marketing spend at this pace. But actually, there are levers where I can dial up and dial down my spend to get there. And I'm aiming to get there with this spend, but still have a chance if I have to cut some of those things back a bit. So sometimes it's about having reserves. Sometimes it's about having levers where you can dial up and dial down spend depending on, how well you're doing.
If you talk about runway there, rather than reserves are like what you have left after you spend it on. And Armstrong from Cohen, with what he did was, when he raised money, he raised in 3 years of runway. So he did not have to time the market. So he could keep functioning the company, and when the market was right, then it would blow up. Do you think how much runway should I need? 3 years? I think that's a bit too much.
I mean, 3 years is a lot, I would say, right? I think typically you're going to want to raise 18 months or so after, 18 months to 2 years after your last round. And if you grow really fast, you might be able to do it a year later. And you do want to raise a bit more than you think you need, right? But we talked about, when you're talking about how much you can raise, sometimes you do not have that option, right? Sometimes you go, well, this is the minimum I need to get me to the metrics, and that's all you can raise, right? And you'd like to have a bit more, right, in the bank to give you some flexibility. I also think that just different founders have different views on this, right? And they're also different mentalities. So we talked about that gun to the head mentality. Some people work better and harder and are less stressed from a position of security, and some people work better when they're up against it. And so there's a bit of self-knowledge that's required, I think, as a founder, to know which one of those two people you are. If you're one of those people that works best when you're really up against it, actually probably don't raise too much, because you're going to ramp up your own performance by doing so. If you're one of those people that's going to get super stressed and therefore you're going to perform better, and not all stress is bad, right? Stress can be a positive thing because it can be used to motivate you and to get you to achieve. But I think it's helpful to know which one of those people you are. And maybe Brian was one of those people where actually he just knows he performs better from that place of security, and that was the right thing for him. And he also had the ability to raise the money, which not everybody is going to have.
Which bucket do you think you fall into?
So that's a good question, because when I was a trader, I was a professional trader at a bank, sat there, you've got I think I generally performed in my head, I wanted the security side of things, but actually, having been a trader and actually having played quite a lot of poker in my life, in both situations, you actually have to be able to perform at your best when you're up against it, or close to your best when you're up against it. Otherwise, you'll end up losing an awful lot of money. So I know I can perform in those circumstances as well and sort of maintain emotional balance. So I don't really know what the answer is. I think I like this one. Fundamentally, I kind of like that one, but I know I can do the other one. And actually, my whole life has been spent doing things where most of what you got paid, where if there was a basic, it was not most of what you got paid, and if you had a bad year, you weren't going to get paid. You weren't going to earn it again the next year anyway, whether that was sort of a lot of the time, most of the time, there's been no basic at all. I think I can't even remember the last time I had a basic salary. So I'm pretty comfortable with that kind of back to the wall thing. I know I can just go and make it happen, and I wouldn't have gone and done those things if I wasn't comfortable with it.
There's sort of like two things. You are comfortable with being up against the wall, but there are people around you, like you have your kids, family, or that kind of thing. You don't want them against the wall, they not do their.
No, I think so. That's fine, right? You don't want to risk your family, whatever. But I think what I've generally done is gone, actually, and it's helpful to have some. It's helpful to have some cash in the bank, if you like, to be able to take those entrepreneurial decisions and take that risks. That's definitely a thing that is helpful, and is more helpful when you've got a family, for sure. When it's just you, you can go, hey, I'm quite happy to go risk everything. But you know what? Like, I'm not going to risk everything. But I also know that if I was starting from zero, I would be fine and I would figure it out. And that's quite mentally freeing, if you like, to go, do you know what? I do have the skill set to figure out what I would do with my life if I was on zero. I do not want to put my family in that situation, and I'm not going to. But it does help free up your mindset, because otherwise you can spend your time worrying about what the future holds, right? Actually, you just want to go, what's the thing that maximizes the future?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I completely agree with that, and I think this is incredible. I think like taking the time out for doing this, and I think I've been in the making for a very, very long time. Other than that, I think one last question that I usually like to end with. I've been into startups, VCs, and all these things that are like 11. What do you think is one fact that we've lowered in your own?
You've had some incredible people on this podcast. You've got some incredible people coming up, and as you know, I'm grateful to be on and to be considered, like, even vaguely near some of those people. But I don't know whether the 11-year-old you would have seen where you are today, and I'm actually interested to know what the 19-year-old you and the 23-year-old you would go back to say to the 15-year-old you. What would blow the mind of the 15-year-old you in 4 years and 8 years' time? That's what I want to know the answer to, rather than the other one.
Yeah, I mean, that other Matthew McConaughey.
And it goes back actually to that compounding question at the beginning, right? You're learning and you're compounding, and you're looking back at the 11-year-old you and go, oh my God, I've come a long way since then. And you're only 15. Where are you going to be at 19 or 23 or 30? Imagine the power of compounding of everything you're doing up to that point. Yeah, it's going to be, I'm going to be watching closely.
Yeah, that goes 15 will be my number. Other than that, I think this has been incredible. I think, I mean, I've been looking forward to this year, but other than that, I think thank you so much for being time out, and I think that's the point I'm saying to you.
And thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Advik.